of people are not aware that this is an issue because it's 2014. Evolution is accepted science, right? And if you're familiar with Lewis Black, who's a comedian, a favorite of mine, poking fun of President Bush when he was talking about, Bush mentioned, he said, when asked about evolution, Bush said, the jury is still out. And Lewis Black's response was, what jury where? The Scopes trial is over. But unfortunately, this is still something that is an issue. Now, evolution is not a controversial idea within the scientific community. This is something that has been accepted science since the 1860s. So again, this is not a new idea. It is a unifying theory in biology. It's supported by mountains of evidence, and continued research and evidence continue to support what we already know. So what is evolution? It's a scientific theory, and it explains the complexity and diversity of life that we see here on Earth. It is the change in allele frequency in the population. So very simply stated, it is change over time. It is testable, it's falsifiable. We can and have observed evolution in action. And something that is important to remember is that evolution specifically refers to changes in populations, so not individual animals. I created a mnemonic to try to help people remember this. It's IAPE. Everybody has an iPhone, right, or an iPad, so it's IAPE. Individuals adapt and populations evolve. So this is a way to help kind of keep that concept in mind. Creationism. So creationism is the idea that the Earth and everything that we see was specially created by a supernatural force, usually a deity, claiming that natural biological processes cannot account for the history, diversity, and complexity of life that we see here on Earth. It is not a scientific theory, and it cannot be tested or falsified. So what are some of the types of creationism? We have old Earth creationism. People that are accepting, or are old Earth creationists, accept the scientific evidence for the age of the Earth and the universe, but they still think that living things were created as we see them today by something supernatural. Young Earth creationism, or young Earth creationists, are most likely what you're going to think of when you hear the term creationism. So these are people that hold a literal interpretation of the Bible and believe that there was a 6-day creation event. And they also believe that the Earth cannot be more than 10,000 years old. So this special creation doctrine involves direct divine intervention and suspends the laws of nature. So this would be as opposed to theistic evolutionists, people who are able to rationalize their belief with science and do believe that God can work through the laws of nature. Young Earth creationists tend to be more organized, and they have groups such as Answers in Genesis, this is Ken Ham's group, and the Institute for Creation Research. These organizations produce magazines, they have websites, they have books and videos that they put out for a general audience, and they do publish journals so that they're able to report on creation science. So when creationists refer to, oh, there was a journal about that, more than likely this is to what they are referring, because as of yet, there are no scholarly or scientific articles that provide any evidence for creationism. And just as an interesting note, Answers in Genesis even opened their Creation Museum in Kentucky in 2007. Something I would like to someday get to see, but definitely do not want to pay for. So young Earth creationists tend to focus on attempting to explain why much of modern science cannot be correct. So the age of the Earth, for example, is a very common target. They're constantly attacking things like carbon dating and say, well, see, this isn't right, and this is why the age of the Earth is incorrect according to science. Then we have intelligent design creationism. And so this is the successor to creation science, the movement. This began in the 1980s. So the term intelligent design replaced creation science, and intelligent design proponents often avoid direct references to God. So they're a lot more vague. They make claims that, oh, there must be an intelligent designer, but they are very careful not to say who or what they happen to think that designer is. And this, they think, gives them an air of scientific credibility, or that it helps them to seem and appear non-religious. They tend to use terms such as irreducible complexity, was a term coined by Michael Behe in his book Darwin's Black Box, and specified complexity, which is a term coined by William Dembski in design inference. So the main concept of intelligent design is the argument from design. So their idea is that highly complex phenomena, the vertebrate eye, for example, could not possibly have come about on their own. They had to have been created by an intelligent designer. We know, however, that this is not the case, and we do actually have many examples of the eye in various animals at various stages of complexity. So you could make a connection as to how you can see that these could be various stages of evolution of the eye. And even though this has been discredited and refuted, it continues to be used by intelligent design and creationism advocates. So again, basically, it's this idea that complexity in nature cannot be explained by nature alone. It cannot be caused or cannot have come about from natural causes. And this is where we see the watchmaker analogy. And so this is another common argument that's used by creationists. So the watchmaker analogy goes something like, watches are very intricate and complex, and they necessitate an intelligent designer. So if you were walking along the beach and you happen to find a watch, you're going to pick it up and say, oh wow, this is really neat, and this is so complex, it had to be designed. I don't see any way that this could have just magically or come about on its own. However, this is a very flawed analogy, and the reason for this is that something as a watch is an inanimate object. It is a non-reproducing object. It doesn't self-replicate. So this is not something we would expect to find in nature. This is something that we know has a designer. Another common kind of variation on that comes, why did I just blank on his name? Kirk Cameron and Ray Comfort. One of the things that they commonly will say is, well, we know if you look at a painting, we know a painting had a painter. You see a building, we know a building had a builder. Again, these are inanimate objects that don't reproduce, so this is a flawed analogy. And what we also see, we see less of a focus on proving creationism and more of a focus on rejecting evolution and redefining science, trying to make things more compatible with their religious beliefs. Often they attack evolution as a way of attacking science itself, and because they seem to think that this is a belief in the foundation of materialist philosophy. And so how do we know this? Is this speculation? Is this something that I'm coming up with? No, actually we know this because of the wedge strategy. This was a document where they actually clearly spell all of this out. So the wedge was a fundraising document from the Center for Science and Culture that set forth the group's governing goals. And the goals include defeating scientific materialism and its destructive moral, cultural, and political legacies. And they want to replace materialistic explanations with the theistic understanding that nature and human beings are created by God. So again, not speculation, something they clearly spelled out. So what are creationist claims? So there's kind of three big claims. The first is that evolution is a weak theory, or it's a theory in crisis. So that it's not agreed about in the scientific community. Is there ongoing research into evolution? Absolutely. Do we understand every single thing about the mechanism of evolution and how it works? No. But that's part of science, is its ongoing research. And the theory of evolution, again, the basic concept that things change over time, is accepted in the scientific community, and again, has been since the 1860s. The next idea is that evolution equates to atheism, and therefore religious faith and acceptance of evolution are incompatible. And this seems to be one of the biggest and main oppositions to the teaching of evolution in school. So there seems to be this fear that if children learn evolution, they're going to be indoctrinated into atheism. Very scary. And this is often where we hear claims of things like, I'm not a monkey, I didn't come from a monkey. If we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? And if you really want to irritate people, you can tell them that you're still a monkey, you're just a rather tall and relatively hairless variety, but that's a whole other thing. And Kent Hovind uses a line, something along the lines of, if you tell children that they're animals, they're going to act like animals, and then you wonder why we see all these horrible things happening in school that we do, which is clearly ridiculous. But evolution is godless. Which is true in the sense that it's science. It makes no claims one way or another about anything supernatural or divine. So it is also important to note that evolution is separate from abiogenesis. So again, the theory of how we get to the complexity and diversity that we see is not the same as how the first organism came into being. And I think that for many religious folks, Evolution challenges this idea that, oh yes, you're special, you were specially created by God in your current form, and this is kind of where we see this hostility and the accusations that evolution equates to atheism. The third is teach both sides. It's only fair, right? We have this whole concept of fairness, things should be fair. And this concept has actually been around since the 1920s to try to get creationism into public school science curricula. But what has been set up here is a false dichotomy. So this issue, as they've stated it, is it's either evolution or creationism. However, in my opinion, this is like comparing apples to goldfish. These are two things that are not compatible. Evolution, again, scientific theory. Creationism is supernatural and usually is a religious idea. So a point which can be made to counter this, teach both sides, have a balanced approach, is that there are actually many creation stories. So which is this other side that they want us to teach, which is the correct other side of evolution that we should be introducing in schools. And this is usually when it's going to come out that, oh, the other side that they mean is the Christian biblical account of creation. That's what they want to see taught in schools. And so if we allow the teaching of alternative creation stories, the only fair way to do this would be to teach all of them, right? It's kind of similar to religious displays on government property. If you're going to allow one, you need to allow all of them to be fair. So of course, in this case, what is the correct decision? The correct decision should be that none of these are taught because they're not science and they don't belong in the science classroom. So what is the illegality? So time and again, what we are seeing is that teaching creationism is unconstitutional. So it is a religious idea, it supports a particular religious belief, and therefore is not science and does not belong in public school science classes. So I only looked at a few court cases because I didn't want to go on and on about legal things because that's not always the most interesting, but I kind of tried to look at some of the major court cases that have structured how we see things being done. So the first kind of phase of creationism is banning the teaching of evolution. So the goal was to ban teaching evolution in the classroom, and this is from 1922 to 1968. So William Jennings Bryan was a politician starting about in the 1890s, and he was very opposed to Darwinism for religious reasons. And following his campaigning, several states decided to start introducing legislation that would prohibit the teaching of evolution. So the 1925 Butler Act was passed in Tennessee, and this was a law prohibiting public school teachers from denying the biblical account of man's origin. It also prevented the teaching of evolution of man from lower orders of animals. Now, you likely know this law, but you probably know it for a different reason. You know it because of the Scopes monkey trial. So the ACLU decided to challenge the law via John Scopes, who was a high school science teacher, and he taught evolution in his science class in defiance of this law. So he was indicted, convicted, and fined $100, and this was eventually reversed by a Tennessee Supreme Court on a technicality. They did, however, find the law to be constitutional under the Tennessee state constitution. So they said, we are not able to see how the prohibition of teaching the theory that man has descended from a lower order of animals gives preference to any religious establishment or mode of worship. So far as we know, there is no religious establishment or organized body that has in its creed, confession, or faith any article denying or affirming such a theory. So William Jennings Bryan argued for the prosecution, and when the trial was going on, the original intent of the ACLU was to oppose the act on grounds that it violated a teacher's individual rights and academic freedom and was therefore unconstitutional. But as the trial progressed, the strategy started to change, and the argument then became that, no, there's actually no conflict between evolution and the creation account in the Bible. And this is kind of the idea of theistic evolution. So one of the things that's kind of funny about how this happened is William Jennings Bryan didn't like the idea that children were being taught that humans were descended from not even American monkeys, but from old world monkeys. Again, we're still monkeys, but the Butler Act remained law until 1967, when Gary L. Scott sued for his reinstatement as a teacher after being dismissed for a violation of the act. The law was then repealed 3 days after Scott filed suit. The next big court case we have is 1968, which is Epperson versus Arkansas. and the 1965-66 school year decided to include a new biology textbook. And this textbook had a chapter about Darwin and evolutionary theory. And Susan Epperson was a teacher in the Little Rock school system. Now, she didn't have any issue with teaching evolution. She didn't have an issue with the book, but she was concerned about being dismissed because of the law that was still on the books. The National Education Association and the ACLU supported her suit to test the constitutionality of this law. The Arkansas Supreme Court decision left the ban in place. However, the United States Supreme Court found that it was in violation of the First Amendment. So, because the Establishment Clause prohibits the state from advancing any particular religion, and they found that allowing the teaching of creationism while banning the teaching of evolution does just that. The next kind of phase in creationism that we have is creation science. So the idea on banning evolution didn't really seem to be working, so why don't we now try to call ourselves science to see if we can then be added into the classroom. And this is from 1969 to 1987. So in 1987, we have Edwards v. Aguillard. And so the act was the Balanced Treatment for Creation Science and Evolution Science Act. And while it did not mandate that creation science had to be taught, it did mandate that if evolution was going to be taught in science classrooms, creation science had to as well. So here's kind of this idea of, balanced approach in teaching both sides. And because of the Supreme Court ruling that bans on teaching evolution were unconstitutional, they thought that maybe this was kind of a way of getting around that. So again, we see this concept of fairness, academic freedom, and teaching all of the evidence. So the Supreme Court ruled that outlawing the teaching of creation science in the decision was that the Supreme Court outlawed the teaching of creation science in American public school science class. And Louisiana's Creationism Act was found to be unconstitutional. Again, it's endorsing a particular religious view by advancing the religious belief that a supernatural being created humans in the concept of creation science. And they also found that comprehensive science education was being undermined by not allowing the teaching of evolution except when creation science was also taught. And interesting to note, there's a textbook called Of Pandas and People. And so this textbook supported the concept of intelligent design and attacked evolutionary biology. And immediately after the Edwards v. Aguillard ruling, the terms creation and creationist were systematically changed to intelligent design and design proponent. So the next kind of phase is 1987 to 2005, and that is intelligent design, also known as creationism, just has a fancy new name. So in the 1990s, intelligent design advocates wanted intelligent design to be taught alongside evolution in public schools as an alternative. So then we get to 2005, and we have Kitzmiller v. Dover. So the school district in Dover, Pennsylvania had a policy change to its biology teaching curriculum in the fall of 2004. And so what this did was it was going to require the teaching of intelligent design as an alternative to evolution. It included a statement that students will be made aware of gaps and problems in Darwin's theory and other theories of evolution, including, but not limited to, intelligent design. So the text of Pandas and People was to be used as a reference material for intelligent design, and it was to be presented as an explanation of the origin of life that differs from Darwin's views. And this statement was supposed to have been read aloud to 9th grade science classes when evolution was being taught. So is this sounding anything like Edwards v. Aguillard? Now, in response to this, 11 parents of students in Dover, Pennsylvania sued the Dover Area School District because of this requirement. And a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania Federal District Court, Judge John E. Jones III, ruled that intelligent design was in fact a form of creationism. Quote, ID cannot uncouple itself from its creationist and thus religious antecedents. And he found that it was therefore unconstitutional to be taught in public schools. So on the question of is intelligent design science, he said, quote, it is not science and cannot be adjudged a valid, accepted scientific theory as it has failed to publish in peer-reviewed journals, engage in research and testing, and gain acceptance in the scientific community. This case was the first trial over intelligent design, and it did receive a large amount of national media attention. It was hailed as a landmark decision for establishing that creationism and intelligent design are in fact the same thing. They are religious teachings, and they are not legitimate areas of scientific research. And just as a quick note, not that political or religious affiliations should matter. Judges should be impartial. It is interesting to note that the judge in this case was a Reagan appointee and is a Christian. And he was still able to find that clearly this is not something that is acceptable in science classrooms. And so while it is not a court case, this is, I think, fun, and have to mention the flying spaghetti monster. So in 2005, as a response to a Kansas school board decision to allow intelligent design to be taught alongside evolution in schools, Bobby Henderson wrote an open letter satirizing creationism and introducing the world to the flying spaghetti monster who created the universe with his noodly appendage. Henderson argued for equal time in the science classroom, stating that his beliefs were just as valid as intelligent design. The only thing here is you must know that in order to tell of his noodliness, you have to be in full pirate regalia. So then, 2005 to the present, we have stealth creationism. So the strategy of intelligent design and creation proponents shifted in the early 2000s to attacking evolution. So somehow they seem to think that if they invalidate claims of evolution, that this would then prove creationism. And if they truly understood science or cared about science, then they would understand what they need to do to submit evidence for peer review and for testing, and then that could actually potentially, validate what their claims are. But they seem to have this idea that they could just try to poke holes in the theory, and then that somehow makes what they're saying correct. And so this is where we get into seeing academic freedom, critical analysis of evolution, and teaching the strengths and weaknesses of evolution. So the Discovery Institute has actually put out templates for such legislation. So one of the ideas is to try to get teachers to portray that there is a controversy within the scientific community. So remember, evolution is this weak theory. It doesn't, scientists don't agree about this. And another tactic was to refer to evolution as just a theory, as if scientific theory and the colloquial use of the word are the same thing. So academic freedom legislation would allow for alternatives to evolution to be taught in science class. And these bills tend to fare a bit better because they're not mandates. So they're not requiring that creationism or intelligent design are taught alongside evolution, but they are very permissive of adding materials or supplementing things and questioning the theory. And so this sounds a lot better to people, and people tend to think, oh, well, that sounds like it's a good thing. The first type of academic freedom bill requires that teachers be able to discuss the full range of scientific views regarding biological and chemical evolution, and offers students protection for subscribing to a particular position on views regarding biological and chemical evolution. And in this type of legislation, we're often seeing unsubstantiated claims of persecution of teachers and students who criticize evolution, hence their claim of academic freedom. The second type focuses on helping students develop critical thinking skills about controversial issues. And this is where we see teachers being granted permission to discuss the scientific strengths and scientific weaknesses of existing scientific theories. And what theories would those be? Evolution and abiogenesis, of course, but they often tack on global warming, human cloning, and stem cell research so that they can kind of seem well-rounded and as if they are not singling out evolution. So academic freedom sounds like a good idea, and a lot of people, think, yeah, that sounds right. Isn't that what you're supposed to be doing in science class? You're going to critically examine things, you're examining evidence, you're testing hypotheses. But clearly, these bills are meant to be misleading, and it's this stealth way to introduce creationism into the science classroom. Another thing to think of is a high school science classroom the correct place for this type of critical analysis to be happening? The American Association of University Professors defines academic freedom in terms of the right of college-level scholars to conduct, publish, and discuss research. And so they are opposed to teaching intelligent design in the classroom with the statement that such efforts run counter to the overwhelming scientific consensus regarding evolution and are inconsistent with a proper understanding of the meaning of academic freedom. Also of an interesting note, in the argument of strengths and weaknesses, the list of weaknesses keeps dwindling down. So they've put out this list of weaknesses that teachers should use when discussing strengths and weaknesses of evolution. One, for example, was whale evolution. So ID proponents wanted students to be made aware of holes in the record of whale evolution. And this has now been removed because all of a sudden we had these discoveries and we have these transitional fossils that ID proponents kept claiming just could not exist. They didn't exist, and all of a sudden, oh wait, here we have them. And so now that's one of the weaknesses that's no longer listed. So most currently under stealth creationism, we have the Louisiana Science Education Act in 2008. And so this was a controversial law that was passed in the Louisiana legislature and was signed by Governor Bobby Jindal. So what this act does is it allows public school teachers to use supplemental materials in science class, things that are critical to established science, such as evolution and global warming. Proponents argue that it's meant to promote critical thinking, so here we hear critical thinking again, and to improve education. State Senator Ben Nevers, who is the person who came up with this, or excuse me, submitted this law, said that it was never intended to allow educators to create, or excuse me, it was intended to allow educators to create an environment that, quote, promotes critical thinking skills, logical analysis, and open and objective discussions of scientific theories such as evolutions, the origin of life, global warming, and human cloning. So one of the things is when you see a lot of these different laws that have been proposed, you see a lot of, again, that common language because they do have those templates from the Discovery Institute. He originally pre-filed the bill as the Louisiana Education Freedom Act at the behest of the Louisiana Family Forum. So they believe that the scientific data related to creationism should be discussed when dealing with Darwin's theory. This would allow the discussion of scientific facts. So the idea here is that teachers are going to feel safe and protected if they want to discuss alternatives to evolution. The executive publisher of Science magazine, Alan Leshner, sent a letter to the Speaker of the House of Louisiana condemning the bill as the latest effort to insert religious, unscientific views into science classrooms. A high school student at the time, Zach Coplin, launched an ongoing campaign, this was in 2010, to try to repeal the law. He said, you don't need a law to teach critical thinking, that's exactly what science is. What you need is a law to teach creationism. Unfortunately, current efforts to repeal the law have not worked and it is still in place. So what are the consequences of all of this? These laws hurt students, they undermine education, and they cost money. So when suits are eventually brought about to counter these laws, the school district and ultimately the taxpayers are the people that are footing the bill for these things. And so all too often, one of the things that we will see happen is teachers are just going to avoid teaching evolution altogether because they want to avoid having to deal with these issues. So what can we do about all of this? Monitor your local school board. So know what their positions are. Ask any candidates what their stance is on science education and teaching of evolution. Watch out for bills that claim to be about academic freedom, critical analysis of evolution, or that want to teach the strengths and weaknesses of evolution. Let your state representative and school board members know that you do not support such legislation and explain why. And attend any meetings that your school board is having about, or the state is having if possible, about revising or adding science standards. And if they give chance for public comment, by all means, please get up and comment. Let them know why this is not science and should not be allowed in science classrooms. So, in conclusion, the idea seems to be that they want to undermine science education any way possible and misinform students. There is this huge focus on what we don't know, trying to emphasize this and create doubt for students about the scientific process and things that we actually do know. Academic freedom does not carry with it the freedom to misinform students, and that is exactly what's going to happen when intelligent design is taught. Teaching creationism is misinforming students. Claims about the supernatural fall outside of the realm of scientific inquiry and therefore do not belong in the science classroom. Creationists have had to reinvent themselves by evolving their strategy in order to survive, to continue and push their religious ideology. Though they continue to use the same tired arguments and weak evidence, that has been discredited and debunked for decades, it is important to continue the fight, their efforts to undermine science education.